I am Carlos Alberto, the thinker. Welcome to the path. In this encounter, we will not attempt to predict the future, nor will we seek to single out winners or losers. Our purpose will be to understand what is happening and what significance it may hold for the coming decades. Stoic Geopolitics does not aim to impose a way of thinking. It proposes a method for better understanding reality. We are living in extraordinary times. Every day we receive news about wars, diplomatic tensions, economic crises, technological advances, trade disputes, political shifts, and social transformations that seem to be happening all at once. Information has never been more abundant, yet understanding seems increasingly scarce. We know more than ever, but often understand less. The news shows us what is happening. Headlines inform us who won, who lost, who is making threats, who is responding, who is signing an agreement, or who is breaking a treaty. But they rarely help us understand why all of this is happening, and perhaps that is one of the greatest challenges of our time. For years, we learned to view events as isolated incidents. A war here, an election there, a financial crisis on one continent, a technological revolution on another, a trade conflict between major powers, mass migration, a new scientific discovery, a cultural shift. Each event seems to have a life of its own. However, history rarely works that way. Major changes almost never appear suddenly. They take shape slowly. They advance quietly. They unfold over years or even decades until one day their consequences become impossible to ignore. That is when we tend to say the world has changed. But in reality, the world had already been changing long before. We simply hadn't learned to observe that process. It was precisely this reflection that gave rise to this series, a series I have decided to call Stoic Geopolitics. Not because I intend to replace traditional geopolitics, nor because I aspire to create a new ideology. Quite the opposite. Stoic geopolitics stems from a simple conviction. As reality grows increasingly complex, we need to learn to think more clearly. And that is where Stoicism still has much to teach us. The ancient Stoics understood that we cannot always control events, but we can control how we observe, interpret, and respond to them. That difference may seem small, yet it can completely transform the way we understand the world. For those who merely react to events end up living from one surprise to the next. In contrast, those who learn to recognize underlying processes begin to discover an order that was previously hidden. It is not about predicting the future. It is not about constructing rigid theories. It is not about finding easy answers to complex problems. It is about developing a way of looking at things, a serene gaze, a patient gaze, a gaze capable of distinguishing between daily noise and the deep currents of history. That is the purpose of Stoic Geopolitics, not to tell you what to think, but to invite you to think better, because thinking better is also a way of living better. Too often, we believe that history changes because of a single decision, a single choice, a war, a financial crisis, an international agreement. But reality is usually far more complex. Societies evolve, economies change, technology transforms the way we produce, work, and communicate. Demographics shift the balance between nations. Energy sources alter the strategic value of entire regions. Ideas change how people understand freedom, authority, justice, and the future. All these processes unfold simultaneously. Some are rapid, others take decades, but none occurs in complete isolation from the others. That is why many people feel the world has become unpredictable. Yet, history teaches us otherwise. Events change, the key players change, technologies change, but certain patterns reappear time and again. Not because history repeats itself exactly, but because human nature retains traits that span every era. And understanding those patterns helps us interpret the present much better. There is an image that can help us understand this idea. Let's imagine a large chessboard. Each piece represents a nation. Each move alters the balance of the whole. The rules remain relatively stable, but the positions are constantly changing, and every decision modifies the possibilities for all the others. The inexperienced observer tends to focus solely on the last move. They see the captured piece, they see the attack, they see the immediate threat. But the true player knows the game began long before. Each move was preparing the way for the next. Each decision opened up new possibilities and closed off others. When a spectacular move finally appears, we are actually seeing the result of a much longer process. Geopolitics works in a very similar way. All too often, our attention is captured by the event of the moment: a war, an election, an economic crisis, an international sanction, a trade agreement, a diplomatic tension, and, almost without realizing it, we come to believe that history begins right there. But reality is usually different. Visible events are merely the part of the process that reaches us. Behind every major decision lie years of economic, technological, cultural, demographic, and strategic transformations that were slowly shifting the balance of the board. That is why anyone who observes only the last move risks misinterpreting the entire game. Stoic geopolitics proposes exactly the opposite. Before rushing to judge an event, we try to understand the process that made it possible. Before reacting to a news story, we seek to ask ourselves what changes had been unfolding long before that story hit the headlines. That shift in perspective may seem small, yet it profoundly transforms the way we understand the world. Because we stop looking only at the facts, we begin to observe the trends. We stop chasing the news. We begin to interpret the processes. And when we learn to recognize those processes, we also learn to ask better questions. Not because we have all the answers, but rather because we are starting to look where almost no one else is looking. That is precisely the path we will travel together in this series. We will not seek to confirm prejudices. We will not attempt to fuel fear. We will not construct simple explanations for a complex reality. Our purpose will be different: to observe, to think, to draw connections, to understand, with serenity, with prudence, and with the intellectual humility of knowing that reality is always richer than any hasty explanation. In a time of abundant, quick certainties, perhaps the greatest act of responsibility lies in learning to think more deeply. For history's great transformations rarely announce their arrival. By the time they become visible, they have almost always been unfolding for a long time. That is why understanding the processes is far more valuable than merely reacting to their consequences. And perhaps that is the greatest difference between observing the world and understanding it. Observing allows us to describe what is happening. Understanding allows us to discover why it is happening. That will be the spirit of Stoic geopolitics. Not to offer definitive answers, but to build, step by step, a more serene, rigorous, and profound way of interpreting reality. But if the board remains the same, why do the moves seem to have changed so much? What are the events currently dominating world headlines really telling us? That is the question we will begin to answer in the next episode of Stoic Geopolitics. Thank you for joining me on this first step. If this reflection has sparked new questions, I invite you to share them in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you wish to walk this path with me and share this content with others who believe that better understanding the world is a way to live with greater freedom. Until we meet again, I look forward to it.